Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/WeHaveWays.
Romans, I will give you the greatest games on earth!
Show them you can fight or die trying.
From the producers of 300.
A 4-horse race is a suicide.
Let the games begin!
Starring Oscar winner Anthony Hopkins.
Behold, this arena will be built for Rome.
Rise or die.
Those About to Die. A new Peacock original series streaming July 18th.
Achtung, Gott in Himmel, was passiert? Der Führer ist tot. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, the Second World War podcast for all your Second World War needs, with me, Al Murray, James Holland, and our very special guest, Roger Moorhouse. And at 12:42, ladies and gentlemen, at 12:42 on the 20th of July, 1944, at the Wolfschanze, the bomb has exploded. Roger, what happens next?
What happens next initially is chaos, Al, actually. They're not even sure what's happened. There's a suggestion it might have been an air raid, or that, there's a mine has gone off. There's all, sort of concentric security around the Wolfschanze, including minefields. So nobody initially is entirely sure what's gone on. Those in the sort of close proximity of the map room where the bomb went off can see, the windows have been blown out. There's sort of smoke billowing out of what's left of them. The roof has come down. There's a huge sort of crater been blown in the concrete floor. That room is often described as a sort of wooden shed. It absolutely wasn't that. It was a large sort of concrete framed building with sort of plasterboard walls, as it were. So reasonably solid and yet slightly flimsy as well, which is kind of significant because a bomb's just gone off in that room, right? So it sort of gave a bit, which means that some of that blast was dissipated. So the briefing room itself has been destroyed.
So actually, sorry, Roger,
yeah.
Do you think if it had been a kind of solid concrete bunker, the effects would have been worse?
Yeah, it's one of those what ifs, I think, because it was a summer's day, so they had it in that room with the windows open and so on. Had it been a cold day, there's a possibility they might have used one of the limited spaces in the bunkers. As anyone that's been to the Wolfschanze, it's well worth a visit. Now in northeastern Poland, you can see what remains of those enormous concrete bunkers that they used, and there are countless of them, and they're absolutely vast. So you can imagine Stauffenberg's bomb going off in one of those spaces within a bunker, completely enclosed, would concentrate.
It would have killed everybody.
It would have killed everybody, absolutely. So, this is one of the what ifs. But I think generally they tended to use these briefing rooms anyway. So, in a sense, I think that's a little bit of a dead end as a what if. Briefing room itself has been destroyed. There are 10 injured in the room. As I said, there were 24 people in the room. 10 of them are injured. Now, this is where we sort of come back to what went wrong, I suppose. So 3 of those are already dying. There's a chap called Heinrich Berger, who was the stenographer, who was writing down all the minutes of what was being said. He'd already had both his legs blown off, so he was lying in a pool of his own blood and wouldn't last the afternoon. General Corton was another one who'd been disemboweled and was also...
What does that mean exactly?
Does
that mean basically your crutch has been blown away?
I think it's your guts. So your guts have been blown out. Messy.
Yeah.
He doesn't last the afternoon. Colonel Brandt is another one who'd lost a leg in the blast. He also doesn't last the afternoon. And the fourth one that was killed was Colonel Schmundt, Rudolf Schmundt, who actually died in October of the same year of the wounds sustained on the day. So you can imagine the sort of chaos. There's lots of injuries. 3 people dying. Hitler himself has been concussed. Eardrums have been perforated by the blast, which is a common thing. A lot of them had the same thing. He also had a lot of cuts and bruises all over him. So basically, he'd been leaning over the map table when the thing exploded underneath it. The whole map table, which has been kind of smashed to splinters, effectively, had been lifted up. So he's got sort of cuts and bruises. He's got splinters in his legs from the oak table. But he's fundamentally, okay. He's walking wounded. And I'm sure you've seen, I think you referred to it earlier on, I think it was you, Al, that famous picture of the tattered trousers of Hitler. That sort of testament to the blast.
As close shaves go, though, pretty close, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if there'd been that second clam charge.
Well, that's the thing. So there are two what ifs here. The one I mentioned before, which is about the second clam charge. I think had Stauffenberg put the second clam charge in, which, as we said before, would have exploded sympathetically, as they say, with the other one, would have detonated sympathetically. That would have, effectively doubled the blast. There's a very good chance that Hitler would have been killed, that many more in the room would have been killed. Maybe not everybody, but, certainly a larger number. The other element that's significant, as I said before, is that Stauffenberg's briefcase had been put on the inside of that sort of slab leg of the table. Which would have projected the blast inwards, effectively towards Hitler's legs. Now, even if Hitler was leaning over the map table, it probably would have taken his legs off, and we know what would have happened then. So that would have been, the ideal place. It would have projected that blast inwards. As it was, the bag was sort of found to be in the way, and it was Colonel Brandt, who's actually one of those that was killed. I just mentioned he lost a leg. Was in the way. He sort of kicked it, and he moved it to the other side of the oak table leg. The blast was all dissipated outwards, away from Hitler. So it's all the people, the three or the four that were killed, were basically on the far side of that table leg. Now that shows you that the blast was substantial, was enough to kill basically 4 people. But also that the table leg then shielded everyone on the other side from it, including Hitler. So again, it's one of those moments we talked before about those moments in which history turns. And that's one of those where Colonel Brandt, kicked the bag, it's in his way, so he picks it up and he moves it to the other side of the table leg. Arguably saves Hitler's life. My argument as well on top of that is that had Stauffenberg put the second charge in, that probably would have been immaterial. But we can't know, right? So there are 2 factors there that basically save Hitler's life on the day.
But Stauffenberg, he assumes Hitler's died. He assumes he's been successful. It's a great big bang. And
how could he possibly be alive?
How could he possibly be alive? What could have possibly have gone wrong? And so he gets his way out of the Wolfschanze. He dumps the second charge, and he has to get on the plane to Berlin, which is, after all, the flaw in the plot, isn't it? He needs to be in Berlin for the moment
at once
for the coup.
The coup, because he's central to the coup, and the problem is he isn't. So,
and he's going to spend 3 hours in the air. Incommunicado.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that obviously immediately is going to draw suspicion to him as well, isn't he? Because where is everybody?
Yeah.
Where's von Stauffenberg?
Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas he could, if he hadn't had to flee, he could easily be the bloke hanging around. I mean, the finger of suspicion would point at him because he left before the explosion. But as you said earlier, people come and go from these conferences. It could be anybody. But the fact he's had to make himself scarce for the second element of his plan.
Should he have just stayed in the room?
Blown himself up?
Well,
and moved the briefcase back. You see a farcical squabble about where to put this briefcase.
No, I want it there.
Don't touch my briefcase.
Yes, exactly. How dare you?
I can't. Yeah, I mean, apart from the comedic value of that, Jim, I can't see how Stauffenberg staying in the room would really help matters. And again, the wider point is,
it would immediately put suspicion away from him.
Yeah, I mean, most likely at the cost of his own life, I suppose. But,
of course,
but I mean, but the thing is, I mean, he
higher purpose and all that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is a degree of higher purpose in their thinking. That's certainly true. But he's also, acutely aware that there is this element, as we said before. They're kind of nervous as racehorses, some of these military plotters. Because they know what they're doing, is going against the oath of allegiance, and that it's high treason and all of that. And bear in mind, I mean, we shouldn't underestimate the significance of what of that element of what they're doing, because they have sworn allegiance to Hitler personally.
Well, and that's the thing that's held them all up.
Yeah, it is.
Stauffenberg's been held up by that himself.
Yeah, so that's a major obstacle. So he knows that he has to get back to galvanize everything that's going on in Berlin.
But and there's no way he could put a call through before he gets on the plane.
Well, they had this chap called Feldgiebel, who was in the communications office of the Wolfschanze. He was in on the plot. If you refer back to your Tom Cruise Valkyrie, he was played memorably by Eddie Izzard, I think, from memory.
Yes.
So Feldgiebel was supposed to send a message through to Berlin, basically to say, Valkyrie is go, kind of, Hitler is dead sort of thing, and then cut off communication from Wolfschanze to the outside world. So crucially, this was going to give them the space and the time to get going in Berlin and elsewhere. While Stauffenberg was in the air, this was the thinking. Now, Feldgiebel kind of cocks this up. So he basically gets a message to Berlin, which is rather garbled, and he basically says, something terrible has happened. Hitler is alive, right? So they said, well, this isn't the code that we were supposed to get. So Berlin doesn't know what's happened. They're confused. And then he sort of fails to shut down communications from the Wolfschanze anyway. Already by 1 o'clock, there are messages going out from Wolfschanze, through SS circles and so on, back to Berlin saying there's been an attempt on Hitler's life and, be on alert sort of thing. So that element of things, fails entirely. And the crucial, the upshot of all of that is that by the time that Stauffenberg actually arrives in Berlin, which is near enough at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the forces against whom he's ranged have had a 3-hour head start to prepare for anything that's coming. Yeah, so he's, it's the worst of all worlds. And in the meantime, all of his fellow plotters who should have been getting on the phone and telexing everyone they could possibly think of, giving those Valkyrie orders to, secure key points and key offices, key ministries, whatever, arrest this person, arrest that person. All of those messages either haven't gone out at all, in many cases they haven't, or else they're being countermanded by official messages, through the official circles of the regime. The coup itself is to a large extent a non-starter for all of those reasons, because they didn't shut down the communications. They lost that 3-hour time when Stauffenberg was in the air, and as we said, that most of his co-conspirators are a little bit half-hearted, and especially when they realise that something's gone wrong, they're all busy trying to sort of reverse squirrel out of the situation.
Yeah. Do we know why Feldgiebel made a mess of it?
Again, I think it comes down to human error. Right. It's another one of those where, he just sort of cocked it up.
Muffs it.
Exactly. So, they had this sort of coded message that should have gone out, Valkyrie is go, or whatever it was, which would have been the code for Hitler, the bomb having gone off and Hitler dead. And he messaged them saying something awful has happened. The Fuhrer is alive. So it's not in code. It's not, they don't know how to read that. So it's,
of course they don't.
It's just confusion all round, unfortunately. So human error.
Wow, what a cock up!
Unbelievable.
So what does happen?
Well, by the time Stauffenberg arrives in Berlin, and he's rather confused because he imagined that there'd be a staff car waiting for him, and the plot, the coup
people
would have
high-fiving him.
Yeah, exactly. And the coup would have been well underway, and they would have seized Paris and all this sort of thing. There's no one there to meet him. Lands at a place called Rangsdorf. There's no one there to meet him, so he basically has to, get an Uber into the middle of town, sort of thing. Find his own way. So he arrives in Berlin belatedly and says, "It's gone well. I killed the Fuhrer." And they said, "Well, that's not what we've heard." So there's, and then he says, "Oh, and what's been happening?" And they said, "Well, not very much." Right, you can imagine the scene. So not much has been going on, and he's saying that he's killed Hitler, and everyone else is saying that Hitler's still alive. So it's basically rather chaotic. They finally trigger. So I kind of start the Valkyrie process at 4:30 p.m. So that's when they start. He's going around galvanizing everyone, saying, "Come on, we've got to do this. This is for Germany," or whatever however he's motivating everybody. So he's finally saying, "This is we've got to do this." They send out the telexes and the messages at 4:30. By which time, the game's up. They've already lost 3 hours to the opposition, and all of those telegrams, as I said, are already being countermanded by official circles. There were some limited successes. So, Paris briefly was in the control of those sympathetic to the plot, and the same thing I think with Vienna. So there were some limited successes, but key thing is that you've got troops basically being used in ignorance of the higher purpose, but being used for the purposes of securing cities or buildings or areas. So, there are troops moving into the Berlin government district, for example, trying to effect what is basically a lockdown in ignorance of the wider purpose. And this is where you get one of those moments again where it turns, because one of those soldiers in command of one of those units is called Major Raymer, who is sent in to take control of the government district and specifically the propaganda ministry. And he's sort of called in. So he's trying to lock down that area of the city. And he's called into the propaganda ministry by Goebbels, who basically says, what the hell's going on? And he says, well, I'm following orders. And Goebbels says, well, have you spoken to the Fuhrer? And he says, no. So he actually has Hitler on the phone. He gets Hitler on the phone. So again, that breakdown of communications doesn't happen. And that does it. And there's this wonderful scene where Raymer, he's an SS officer, I think, but he's no, he can't be. He must be. I think he must be Großdeutschland from memory. Visibly, kind of stands to attention as he hears Hitler's voice on the telephone. So he stands absolutely straight, listening to Hitler's voice. And Hitler says, "You recognise my voice? You know who I am?" And he says, "Yes, yes, mein Führer," or whatever. And Hitler basically says, "These are my instructions. You are to listen to." Goebbels, listen to the SS. You're not to listen to the replacement army. In a sense, that's where the thing begins to fall apart. That the slow start, and then every message that they're getting out has been countermanded.
So within 6 hours, really, of the bomb going off, it's over.
Within 6 hours, and bear in mind that 3 hours of that were lost anyway. So it really is it's really a sort of
it's a testament to totalitarianism. If you want to get stuff done.
It's a sad thing to say, but it's the plot side of it, the wider conspiracy, the wider coup, is a bit of a damp squib. Let's be honest. They never really get going. And Goebbels finally, there's a radio broadcast where the news of this bomb plot is broadcast, and in a sense that's where everything unravels, because all of those who are still operating supposedly in ignorance of the coup realize what's going on. That's where it all begins to fall apart, and then it's almost like an explosion where it kind of, comes, all reverts back to its epicenter, which is the Bendler block in Berlin, where Stauffenberg's office was, which was the headquarters of the replacement army.
Which is still there.
Which is still there, and it's well worth a look. It's a very well done museum of German resistance. So it's well worth a look. And even there, there's sort of chaos in there, because there are some elements within there, a lot of soldiers within that building were in ignorance of the plot anyway. So they realise that there's something afoot, and they go, well, what the hell? What's been going on in our name, sort of thing. So they make a show of loyalty and demanding to know what's going on. The plotters themselves are beginning to waver, because they can see that, this little venture that they'd had is going to end at, finish at the end of a noose. Violence between them. So Stauffenberg is actually shot during, some of that sort of wrestling for control within the Bendler block. Who's he
shot by?
I don't know who was shot by, but there was obviously a bit of a kerfuffle, we might call it, a kerfuffle within the corridors, and weapons were drawn. And there's a lovely line where he says at the end of all of this, they've all left me in the lurch, which I thought was like a lovely kind of plaintive plea.
Stauffenberg says this.
He says that. Yeah, they've all left me in the lurch. And even his superior, General Fromm, who's the commander of the replacement army, has been, he's in on the plot, but he's kind of, again, trying to sort of reverse squirrel out of what's going on, trying to cover his traces.
Setting fire to stuff in his waste paper bin, basically.
Yeah, basically. But he also makes a big show of, arresting the plotters, Stauffenberg and his adjutant and others, and basically, and sort of holding a kangaroo court-martial in his office, where all four of them, unsurprisingly, are sentenced to death. But he's trying to kind of contain the chaos, because he knows that it's, any wider investigation is very quickly going to implicate him. Yeah, as it ultimately does. So he's trying to sort of contain this situation by basically nipping it in the bud and having those four executed.
And
so this all goes on in that evening.
There's the farce with Beck, isn't there? Who's a former, and isn't he former head of the army or chief of staff of the army?
Yeah, he's, I mean, very, very senior officer of long-standing and a really glittering military career. He'd been in touch with the military resistance for a long time, since the mid-1930s as well. So he's one of those that's kind of saw what was going on, and he was one of those, again, sentenced to death at the same time and he requested, where they were all supposed to be disarmed and taken away to be executed, he requested the opportunity, given his seniority, to keep his sidearm so that he could kind of do the right thing. And it's said that he tried twice to shoot himself in the head. I don't know quite how you do that.
No, I don't really
what that actually means. Do you miss? I mean, there was another one. I think it was General Stauffenberg, who was when they had the whole roll up. We're sort of jumping ahead of ourselves, but Stauffenberg, I think, was when they had the whole roll up of the resistance circles. He knew he'd be implicated, and he took himself away somewhere quiet and tried to shoot himself in the head, and succeeded only in blinding himself, which again that he didn't miss. But he just effectively missed his brain. I mean, I don't want to think too much about the realities of what this means. But apparently,
But a sergeant steps in to help Beck, though.
Exactly. So Beck is finally dispatched by a sergeant. I mean, it's rather gruesome scene. And then finally, at midnight the same night, the final coup de grace is given, and those four, who are Stauffenberg, von Heften, who was his adjutant, Friedrich Olbricht, and Merz von Quernheim, who are the two sort of most implicated plotters from the Bendler block. They're all taken out one by one in front of a pile of building sand out in the courtyard, and you can visit the spot. That's where the memorial is now at the Bendler block. They're taken out one by one and shot by a firing squad from the Großdeutschland division. And supposedly Stauffenberg, this is disputed, but Stauffenberg, as he was led before the firing squad, supposedly he said, "Long live secret Germany," again, so referring back to that concept of Stefan George and that sort of, the eternal cultural Germany, which
the pre-Nazi Germany.
Yeah, sort of pre-Nazi Germany. I mean, I think it kind of makes sense if that really was what he said. It makes sense, and I think that was an essential part, really, of his motivation. But then again, I mean, that who's to know? That could be just a bit of poetic sort of post facto justification.
If we think that's the end of the story, we'd be very much mistaken, and that's what we will come to.
Join us after the break for Aftermath of Valkyrie. This is, by the way, Roger, I'm enjoying this enormously. It's great.
Yeah, me too.
Good.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah. We'll see.
Very, very neatly done, chaps, I must say.
We'll see you after the break. Thank you. Well, we've been doing it a bloody long time. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, James Holland, and our very special guest, Roger Moorhouse, who has been guiding us through the rapids of Plot to Kill Hitler, Operation Valkyrie. Stauffenberg's been executed. The plot's died within the day of its attempted. It has been executed in the day it was executed, so to speak.
Indeed.
So the bomb goes off at 12:42, and basically by midnight it's over. But there's tons to come, isn't there? Because after all, Hitler's neither known for his moderation nor his lack of paranoia, right?
That's very well put, Al. Absolutely right. So there's then, in the days and weeks and months that follow, there's a sort of massive trawl, if you like, a rolling up of the wider plot, for one thing. The military plot was one aspect, and that's significant. We'll come to that. But it had sort of attached itself, as it were, to the wider civilian resistance. Organizations or groupings like what was known as the Kreisau Circle, for example, which was conservatives, a lot of nobility involved there as well. And then the wider political resistance, which spanned the spectrum, all the way from socialists to monarchists on the other side. So there's a much wider circle of conspirators on the one hand, but also people that knew about it and cheered it on the other side, to be wound up. And the Gestapo and the SS set about that with what should we say, alacrity, and very swiftly are sort of pulling in people interrogating people, torturing people, of course, getting them to reveal names. Then they pull them in. Family members of everyone concerned are pulled in and interrogated as well to see what they knew. So there's a massive dragnet goes on.
And are they pulling in their usual suspects as well? So just basically when they've had their eye on, or is this a fresh drag?
I think it's a pretty targeted drag, actually, because it's so big. They don't really need to, look at the usual suspects. And by 44, if there are people that they are suspicious of, they've probably been removed and dealt with anyway.
Yeah, of course.
So there's enough people. They actually pull in, I think, about 7,000 people interrogated as part of this wider investigation. And just to give you a taste of how bloodthirsty it was, of the 7,000, 5,000 are executed, which is kind of astonishing. So some of those are sort of judicial executions or extrajudicial executions. And later on you have the People's Court. I'm sure some of our listeners will know those scenes or photographs of the People's Court and the screaming Judge Freisler. He used to just shout at them and call them paedophiles and perverts. And they were being arraigned, very often they've been kept in the cells for, a few weeks by that point. So they were all looking disheveled. They were given, essentially sort of tramps' clothes and no belts and things like that. So they're standing there looking about as bad as you could possibly look, holding up their own trousers because they didn't have any belts. And
I once
Freisler
knew someone who'd come before Freisler.
Oh yeah,
she was called Lise Graf, and she was in the Resistance. She actually worked for the OSS. She was an Alsatian. She was fascinating. She was caught, and she was in a cell next to one of the really famous SOE female agents. She was eventually transferred to Plötzensee and brought before Freisler.
Yeah.
And she just thought she was going to be beheaded. I mean, she just thought that was her fate. But actually, she was sent to Ravensbrück. So it was all okay.
So survived the day. Yeah,
she survived. Yeah, she survived Ravensbrück. But she said it was just he was just insane.
I mean, I know this is a gallery of unpleasant characters, but Freisler is right up there,
isn't he?
He's right up there.
Yeah.
There are a few people that escaped the maelstrom. Henning von Treskel being one of them. So on the 21st, so the day after.
That's amazing, Roger.
Escaped in the sense that he committed suicide.
Okay, there we go.
rather than actually escaping with his life. I mean, he knew that they were going to come for him at some point because if they're doing that dragnet, his name is going to come up. He was actually on the Eastern Front. He was in what was then effectively occupied Poland. And knew what was coming, wandered out into no man's land by all accounts, pulled out a hand grenade and held it to the side of his head. And that was the end of Henning von Treskel. Again, I don't want to think too much about the practicalities of that.
Yeah, you're not going to end up being just blinded with that.
No, that at least is, you're sure that that's going to do the job, aren't you, at that point? You mentioned Plötzensee, Jim. So Plötzensee was one of the sort of focal points of that, the sort of wave of executions. Some of them, of course, famously were hanged with piano wire, and their death throes filmed for propaganda purposes. So this really is.
There's lots of guillotining, isn't there, as well?
There's the main process of killing for treason cases was guillotine. So that was part of the judicial process, if you like, in Nazi Germany. So a lot of earlier, particularly assassins, someone like Maurice Bavor, who tried to or plotted to kill Hitler in 1938, he was executed by guillotine. So, it was kind of, it sounds odd, but it was standard practice for treason cases. So actually them using piano wire is part of the whole sort of humiliation and the whole...
I presume to make it hurt.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically being throttled essentially. So it's not just a sort of a quick, comparatively elegant death like guillotining would be. So it's part of that wider, create as much pain and stress as possible.
This process, I mean, even Rommel is part of this sort of aftermath, isn't he? The bow wave.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was implicated because he's mentioned in some of the documents that were sort of uncovered in this dragnet. They basically send a couple of investigators to him to say, well, do you really want us to investigate this further? Or do you want to do the decent thing? And Rommel basically chooses the decent thing. That's already in October with Rommel, so it's a good few months later. So it's further on.
But
down
the interesting thing
that's
Rommel,
how far the ripples go out. But basically, all you have to do is be mentioned. You don't.
Exactly.
You've been involved.
But
he's not involved.
on the day that Rommel gets badly shot up, returning in his car from a meeting with Dietrich in Normandy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's several SS, Waffen SS guys, generals. It's the 17th of July, so it's 3 days before the plot.
Now they're all saying,
they are planning
we're done for.
They are openly discussing throwing in the towel in Normandy.
And I think
he's not implicated in this plot, but he's definitely
He's a defeatist, Jim.
Yeah, well, a realist, I think. Realist.
Well,
a realist, yes, but he's not very real, is he? Because he wants to then join forces with the
which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah. But again, I think he was one of those that probably was a bit outspoken to the wrong person, and he was, on the list of potentially friendly elements, within the Wehrmacht, essentially. Yeah. So that's why he was then sounded out and ultimately took his own life. So I mean, another element we should talk about in this context is this concept of Sippenhaft, which I suppose we translate as kin detention. So
yes,
where basically your wider family are arrested and imprisoned as well. And the most sort of spectacular and most spectacularly awful example of that is Stauffenberg's own wife, Nina, who was pregnant at the time with his what would be his fifth child. And she was initially taken to, she was interrogated for one thing, and then she was taken to a mother and child facility that was kind of very tightly controlled, tight security, and so on. She gave birth and then was promptly sent straight to Ravensbrück, to a concentration camp, straight afterwards. The newborn and the other children were all sent out to sort of SS children's homes and so on. And clearly with the intention that, they wouldn't see their mother again.
She becomes a member of the Prominenten, doesn't she, later on in the war?
Yeah.
So there's these 140, 137, something like that, people. And it's an incredible mixture.
Mixture. They end up down in Austria.
In the South Tyrol, they end up in northern Italy, actually.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of almost shootout between Wehrmacht and SS troops in the nearby
It's
town.
a wonderful
They're being
story
held in this
Prominenten.
beautiful hotel on the on this lake. And the orders from Kaltenbrunner are to execute them, the whole lot, and it includes Halder, General Halder. It also includes that rather crap SIS MI6 spy who's captured. Is it October 1939 or November 1939, right on the Dutch-German border?
The
Venlo incident. Is it the Venlo
Stevens
incident?
and Payne Best, those two.
Payne Best. So Payne Best is there. He's sharing a room with a really senior German general. It's absolutely amazing in this hotel by the lake. Anyway,
it's a lovely story.
And Mrs. Frau von Stauffenberg is a part of that.
Is one of those. So there are two notable survivors of all of this. One of them is Fabian von Schlabrendorf, who was Trescow's adjutant. So he's the guy that actually went to the Wolfschanze to retrieve the brandy bottle bomb. He got that job. He was arraigned in front of the People's Court and Freisler, as we were just mentioning. And this was already February of 45. His defense, or his sort of judicial complaint, if you like, was that he'd been tortured, which was true. So he said, I've been tortured, so therefore, anything I say is inadmissible. You can't, this trial is, can't be continued because that's against the law. Because they had, in a sense, the pretense of a due legal process, that did sort of hold things up.
That worked.
It sort of worked up to a point. And in the end, I mean, it delayed it long enough. I think it was February the 3rd, 45. Berlin is subjected to one of these daylight raids by the American Air Force that they did so well by the end of the war. And the courthouse is actually hit, and Freisler is killed. So the presiding judge is killed in the middle of the case, right? And Schlabrendorf,
you've just made the case for the strategic bombing offensive.
Well, exactly, right there, yeah. So Freisler is killed pretty much in camera. I mean, while he's in the courtroom, and Schlabrendorf is essentially, I mean, he's not set free because he then has to go through a sort of succession of camps and holding cells where they're discussing what to do with him. But ultimately, the end of the war sort of takes over, and he survives the day, which is remarkable. And the other one is Hans Casavius, who is one of the few sort of great chroniclers of the resistance. He came from the foreign ministry, diplomatic service, and so on. Was pretty close to the centre of things, and he went underground. When the whole thing fell apart, 20th of July, went underground and managed to escape some months later, I think in 1945, he escaped across the border into Switzerland, and he wrote a memoir of the whole thing. So, two notable survivors, but pretty much everybody else, was liquidated in that roundup. So we have to think about, I suppose, a sort of a post-mortem, really, of the whole thing.
Well, yes, and the kind of the scales of paranoia that descend on Germany, and the fact that the Battle of the Bulge takes place is in that incredible secrecy is because of the threats to, if you don't do what we say, we'll come for your, it's a Sippenhaft thing, we'll come for your family as well as you. That scale of paranoia, that grip, definitely, I'm sure it extends the war. It must do. Because
absolutely. It's a major contribution to the fact that the war carries on as long as it does.
So there's a massive tightening in the aftermath. There's a massive tightening of SS power, basically, and particularly over the Wehrmacht. So the Wehrmacht was always, had this sort of tradition. It sounds a little bit like we're kind of giving the Wehrmacht excuses because, as we know, they behaved abominably in many instances. There was, in spite of all of that, there was still an element within the Wehrmacht, if you like, a sort of an apolitical element to it, which goes back to the Reichswehr of Weimar, where, you couldn't have, a political membership of a political party or so and join the Reichswehr. You had to give up the political party membership. So it had this sort of apolitical ethos to it. Obviously that diminishes and dissipates as time goes on, but there's still an element of it. And I think this is where the military resistance kind of grows out of that soil, if you like. But by 1944, the sort of suspicion on the part of people like Hitler and the SS that these guys are really not on our side, i.e. the Wehrmacht, their own army. That suspicion, which had kind of been growing, and he always talked about, he talked about, the phrase he used was, I'm bored of having to goad the butcher's dog, talking about the Wehrmacht, right? Why do I have to sort of provoke them into doing things? Why am I the one that has to, make them go and invade countries, right? They should be doing it themselves. Goading the butcher's dog. Suspicion, if you like, low-level suspicion of the Wehrmacht, which culminates in the Stauffenberg plot, results in a massive tightening by the SS. So you've got effectively, the same as in the Red Army commissars. You've got the same thing being inserted into the Wehrmacht in that last few months of the war as a result of the Stauffenberg plot. Yeah,
it's also, if you're working towards the Führer in your mindset, you now have to be not just within the officer class, but if you're a regular Nazi or a regular German who's grown up in that environment, you're working towards the Führer, there's all more reason to do it now. You have to express your loyalty. Loyalty is core. And I think this is how you end up with a mindset of people, the suicide craze and all this stuff that's to come in the sort of pathology of the Nazi mindset has been absolutely radicalized and accelerated by the failure of the plot. In a way, you sort of think, had it succeeded, after all, the spell would be broken. The spell would be broken, which is what happens when Hitler commits suicide himself at the end of the war, isn't it? It's the idea that suddenly, we're all freed of our oath. Yeah. People would have been surely seen themselves. Enough people would have seen themselves freed of their oath had the plot succeeded. Although I think
that's an important point. Yeah,
I think and but also would have regarded Stauffenberg as a traitor. So there's the of course that tension. But at least it's the great get out, isn't it? Is Hitler's death at the end of the war for an awful lot of people.
Yeah, it is, because that's where we come back to that that sort of oath of allegiance that we mentioned, but also, like we just used that word, the sort of spell. I mean, Hitler did have.
They're in his thrall.
Yeah, they were in his thrall. Absolutely right. Yeah, as bear in mind that when his survival is announced on 20th of July, on the following day, there are Te Deums sung in cathedrals across Germany, and there's widespread sort of celebration and so on that he's survived, and that's not entirely forced. That's to some extent that's a real outpouring of public affection. It's very strange. I mean, you think by that time that they were kind of desperate for a way out.
Yeah, and also he's a recluse. The public haven't heard from him really. Yeah. He's vanished from public life, at this point, hasn't he? Really?
Yeah. So, apart from gripping young 14-year-old's cheek for very briefly on the 14th of April.
Well, exactly, and that's unusual for it happening at all, isn't it?
Yes,
it's striking happening at all.
Not
just that, because I think we've parsed why it went wrong. The sort of what ifs at the core of it, failing to complete the bomb, the moving the briefcase. What do they really think's going to happen? Because there's this idea, isn't it, that they're going to fight the Soviets with the Allies and all that sort of idea. The idea that's sort of being booted about, isn't there, by some?
This is the problem. I think. There are two things to look at in any sort of post-mortem of this. Obviously there's two elements. There's the assassination element, and then there's the wider coup. Now, the assassination element could have worked. As we said, it was a pretty close run thing. That could have worked. The wider coup is much more problematic for all the reasons that I've already mentioned. Stauffenberg is absolutely central to it, and he has to be in two places at once, which is a problem. His co-conspirators, nervy at best, to a large extent, equivocal at best. The plan itself is also hugely ambitious, and it's requiring the buy-in in ignorance of large numbers of German soldiers who are otherwise entirely loyal. Right. So that can fall apart at any moment. An awful lot here that could still go wrong, even if Stauffenberg managed to kill Hitler. There was an awful lot, with the wider plot, which was wildly ambitious, that could have gone wrong. Beyond that, in the sort of wider conspiracy, there's no unanimity as to precisely what they want to get out of this. I mean, obviously they want to get the Nazis out and, neutralize the SS, neutralize the Gestapo and so on, and take power. And they want Germany not to collapse for all the reasons I mentioned before. But beyond that, there's absolutely no unanimity of what they want at all, right? So there's some within those political circles that would have come to the fore, who are still thinking about, keeping the gains of 1940 and, Alsace-Lorraine, Province Posen, West Prussia and so on, occupied Poland. They're thinking, which shows you they're in crowd cuckoo land if they think this is going to be possible. Yeah. And then worse than that, they're thinking, well, we can pause the fighting on the Western Front against the Allies, Western Allies, because, we don't really have a big problem with them, but we have a problem against the Soviets. So we'll keep fighting on the Eastern Front against the Soviets. Again, this is just not going to happen. It's cloud cuckoo land. So I think the wider elements, both of the coup itself and then of what might have followed, are sort of wildly optimistic as to what was possible.
You could go wildly optimistic. You could also go completely bonkers.
Completely bonkers. Yeah, we can say. Yeah, we can.
Just really. Yeah. And this is the atmosphere in Germany, and not just around the inner circle of Hitler, is one of just sort of. I always kind of sort of feel that the whole Nazi regime is basically a kind of sort of fantasy world, albeit a very kind of dark, sinister fantasy world. Sort of more Tim Burton than Disney, I'd say. But, so it's all La La Land, the whole thing, the whole conceit, the foundations on when it's built are bonkers, everything about it. It's sort of, it's so mad, it's not true. Yeah. But the awful thing is it was true. But you also see, but by the end, by 1944, whether you're in the Hitlerian inner circle or not, it's so bonkers that no one can think clearly because they've got themselves into this sort of awful situation of which there is no easy way out. And so you're clutching at straws and you're thinking, okay, well, when we do this, because you have to have hope. You have to have some light which will guide you because otherwise there is nothing.
Even the people opposed to it are deluded. Is the thing.
They're deluded. They're all deluded.
The people opposed to the delusion are deluded. They've become so far detached from reality. The Allies, I think, they see this as, well, Germany's collapsing. It's 1918.
Yes, bring it on.
It's falling in on itself. And all we've got to do now is kick the door in and the whole thing's going to collapse in on itself. Yeah, and they don't realise that actually the thing that the Nazism has internalized is a reaction, is making sure that doesn't happen again. And that the great shame of 1918 is a big part of you've avenged Versailles. You've tried to destroy Bolshevism. You've certainly done everything you can to destroy the Jews of Europe. The other thing you have to absolutely make sure doesn't happen again is the collapse and the ignominy of 1918.
Yeah,
and this again, this turbocharges that. The assassination plot turbocharges the resistance to that happening again within the German mind, the general German mindset, not just within the regime. Yeah. But the Allies are thinking, great, it's all happening. That we've made greater strategic gains than we did in 1918, and we're a whole year into 1918 German collapse.
Yes,
and writing being on the wall. surely this is the end of things. Whereas in fact, it's the reverse in terms of what's going on inside the German government, because you sort of.
And you look at the acceleration. I mean, of the, if you like to put it very bluntly, but that, the Nazi Germany's signature project, the Holocaust. Look at the acceleration of killing at Auschwitz. Of the Hungarian Jews, for example, which all happens in the autumn of 44. I mean, all of that is, as you say, is turbocharged as a result of this. This is right. Last Chance Saloon. 1918 is not happening again. Remember, those were Hitler's words. So you're absolutely right. It's the reverse. It's a tightening of the regime and a speeding up of those signature projects. But
also a contributory factor to Allied victory fever in the autumn of 1944. Yeah. They think it's coming. One last heave and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's in the last few minutes, let's just quickly look at the legacy of it, because he hasn't always been venerated, has he, von Stauffenberg? No,
he was seen, for a long time in post-war Germany, he was seen, I suppose, at worst as a traitor, and he was officially seen as a traitor for a long time. So his wife, for example, couldn't collect his pension. I think the late 50s, was it 58 from memory?
That's crazy.
Because he was formally seen as a traitor, right? Now, I think this is where Germany, for a long time post-war, essentially tried to forget about the Third Reich as far as was humanly possible. And then there's a shift, there's this wonderful German word, which I'm sure you both know, Vergangenheitsbewältigung.
Yes.
The process of coming to terms with the past.
I say that every morning before breakfast.
I'm sure you do. But that as an idea, it kind of kicks in really in the, I suppose, post-68 really gets going in the 1980s, where there's a real sort of spasm of, inward self-reflection and so on. But for a long time, the dominant attitude in Germany is, don't mention the war. Don't talk about the war. Forget about it. It's, get your head down, economic miracle, all that sort of thing. So in that shift, Stauffenberg obviously has a role to play, because he's one, comparatively bright light in an otherwise utterly dark field, right? From that history. So he does get sort of pulled up, and they have barracks are named after him and streets are named after him and so on. And he becomes, to some extent, the sort of, the sort of poster boy, certainly of the German resistance, which is still a tiny minority of the population, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Certainly the poster boy of the German resistance, and to some extent, I suppose, also by extension, the sort of poster boy of, of anything that's salvageable from the Third Reich. And for all the reasons that we mentioned before when we talked about Stauffenberg's background, he's not that. He's not a Democrat. He's not someone that would have looked at the post-war Federal Republic and said, yes, this is somewhere that I think is a good place and a good system.
Yeah.
He's not a lily-livered centrist, is he?
He's absolutely not a centrist dad or any of those things. No. So, in a sense that you can understand why he's been, picked up and utilized in that way. But, the more you know about Stauffenberg, the more you kind of have to cock an eyebrow at some of that.
You have to qualify him, don't you?
And
he has to be qualified.
Absolutely. And Roger, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this, the next step will be to revisit the film Valkyrie, because that's certainly what I'm going to be doing.
Well, after they've read Killing Hitler, of course, Jim.
After they've read Killing Hitler, of course, yeah. So read Killing Hitler, which is completely brilliant, and then watch Valkyrie.
It's tremendous. Killing Hitler is a tremendous book.
It is a tremendous book. I have it on my shelf somewhere around here in my Nazi section.
I have it downstairs so that my children will read it.
but the film, I mean, out of 10.
The film is absolutely not as bad as everybody thought it would be. I have problems with, I suppose, Tom Cruise playing
Did look a bit like him, though.
He did look a bit like him. I think there was a slight lack of complexity in the character. But actually, the film is pretty close to real events.
Run of events. Yeah.
It depicts it rather well. It's cinematically quite good, visually quite good. So actually, marks out of 10, I'd probably even give it a pretty solid 7. I'll be honest.
You can't do 7. You can never give 7 out of 10. You can only do 6 or 8, because 7 is the cop out. Everyone knows that. You can never give 7 out of 10.
Wow.
I mean, there is.
It's got to be one or the other.
In that case, I'm afraid it's going to have to be a 6.
That's fine.
I can't give it an 8.
There is the striking thing with it that they did it in Berlin, a large chunk of it. And you've got people in German uniforms and swastikas in Berlin and everything, which is really like, which I think goes partly to what you're saying, Roger, is that in Germany he is part of your way out of the moral maze of the Third Reich, isn't he? He's one of the people. He's one of the breadcrumbs that lead you to redemption.
Yeah.
I wish they'd lured Von Tresco a bit more. Do you know what Von Tresco says before he takes himself off with the hand grenades and pistols?
Go on.
He says, a man's moral worth is established only at the point where he is ready to give his life in defense of his convictions.
Wow. And he certainly did that.
But you know what?
But I absolutely agree with you about Von Tresco. He needs to be up there. He needs to be up there mentioned in the same breath as Stauffenberg.
This is a world where people are saying that all the time, aren't they? Those sort of things. It's the sort of thing. I mean,
but he's, talk about courage and convictions.
Oh yeah,
he lived it. He did it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's we talk about that sort of legacy, and in a sense, the legacy of Stauffenberg, is a mixed one because of all the problems with the wider conspiracy and all of that. And then we talked about how he's utilized by history, perhaps in a slightly unrealistic way, but in one element, he and Tresco were absolutely successful, which is that point that they said at the time, is that they showed there was another Germany, right? That there were people who were willing to stand up and say, this is wrong and we are better than this, and all of that. And that, I still go back to that. I know there's a lot of people still say, the plot was kind of Johnny-come-latelys because they're losing the war. Absolutely, I accept that. But there is a very strong moral element to what they were doing.
Well, Von Tresco says before that last sentence, he says, the whole world will vilify us now, but I'm still totally convinced that we did the right thing. Hitler is the arch enemy, not only of Germany, but of the world. When, in few hours' time, I go before God to account for what I have done and left undone, I know I will be able to justify what I did in the struggle against Hitler. He says that on the 21st of July.
Well, in that sense, they're the negative print of the acceleration of the Nazi project, aren't they?
Yeah.
If the defeat of the war means that they're going to speed up genocide, they are the reverse image of that. They're the people whose time's running out, so we've got to do something. Because the Nazis are thinking time's running out, we've got to do something.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
They're the reflection of that, as it were.
And they know and they know they're doomed. They know it's not going to work. I mean, Tresco basically says that. He says we have to do it just to show that there was a different Germany. Yeah. So in that, absolutely right. I think that's a beautiful way of putting it.
You can see it. You can bracket them with the White Rose and as an example of that other Germany.
Yeah,
because they're as ineffective as they could be, the White Rose, but they matter for that too.
Yes. Precisely. Yeah. So I think we have to hold on to that element of it, that moral element, with all the caveats, but that moral element I think is something, if we only take one thing away from this story, it's that moral driver that they had.
Well, Roger, thank you so much for joining us. This has been
it's been absolutely totally brilliant.
The fact it has a movie plot, I mean, is as well. It's absolutely amazing, isn't it? And that thing of individual moments, expediency.
Yeah.
How the tiniest thing can go wrong and have the most gigantic consequences as well. I mean.
Yeah, no, it is a fantastic story. You can see why people keep coming back to it. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. A huge thank you to Roger for joining us and taking us through this.
Tip top, Rog.
Yeah, absolutely incredible.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
I'm sure that what most of you did was immediately subscribe so you could listen to both of these at once. But if you have subscribed, then you've a million hours of war waffle to work your way through. Some of it as good as this. Thank you or your Patreon subscriber, in which case, thank you very much for being an independent company member. We will see you all very soon again. Thanks for listening and cheerio.
Auf Wiedersehen.